with people they don't even know, that their kids are sick, that they are, hungry and thirsty, that they can't even go to the bathroom, and when they do, they have to queue for hours to get in, and it's not even clean. So it's been almost like every story has had those themes running through it. But one woman's story really stuck with me, and my colleague Amira Haruda spoke to her a week ago over the phone. Her name is Samah Al-Farra. Samah is a 46-year-old mother of 10. Her oldest son is 24 and her youngest daughter is 6. And they fled from the north during the first few weeks of fighting. And after moving around a few times, they ended up all sharing one tent at a UN shelter on the beach in Rafah. And from what she was describing, it is a horrible situation. They're sleeping on the sand that she says was not clean because people were dumping dirty water there, because the rains were causing the sand to become muddy, and because there's no sanitation or sewage systems. There's also no garbage collecting services in Gaza, and what we're seeing is that garbage is piling up nearly everywhere, and the beach is no exception. And now that it's winter and the temperatures are dropping, it's getting cold, and it's a tent, it doesn't protect them. And at one point during the interview, my colleague Amira asked her if she feels safe, and she immediately said no. She said that they can hear the sound of Israeli airstrikes above them at night. They're not able to sleep because of the anxiety and the fear, knowing that bombs are being dropped around them. And when we asked her, what are they eating? She said nothing. They don't have anything to eat. And she told us that her 6-year-old was so hungry that she would always ask for food. She would say, Mama, I want food. Mama, I want food. But she had nothing to give her. She told us that she's been going around her area, knocking on people's doors and asking if they could spare some clean water for her to give to her children.
So she's actually begging for clean water.
Right.
And what about water to wash and bathe her children in?
Well, they're using contaminated water that she told us smells really bad. And they're using that to drink and to wash. And she was telling us how when she washed her hands in this water, she felt dirtier and not cleaner, that her hands smelled worse after she washed them. And the lack of clean water meant that they haven't been able to shower or clean themselves. And she told us that 2 of her daughters, her youngest, have lice, and she can't even brush their hair or wash it because she can't afford shampoo. So she was considering cutting their hair just to avoid that altogether. They've also got skin rashes and have been itching uncontrollably. But the most striking fact about this family is that only days after arriving at this UN shelter on the beach, the entire family began feeling sick. She was telling us how all of her children, as well as herself, have had a high fever and have been vomiting and having diarrhea, and they haven't been able to go to a hospital or to see a doctor for several reasons. One being that hospitals are completely overwhelmed and there won't be anyone available to help them there. And they're new to the area, they don't know Rafah, so they don't know which clinics exist and if they're even open or operational. And even if they did find a clinic, she told us that they were too weak to walk there. So they have nothing to do except except wait it out.
So she hasn't actually had a diagnosis then because she actually can't get to the hospital.
Exactly. She was telling us that her 9-year-old son was having seizures from what she assumed was the high fever, but she couldn't know for sure. And she was telling us how her 6-year-old daughter, Hala, is so weak that she's sleeping all day. She's lying down and she's too tired to even scratch her own skin. So she's been asking her mom to scratch it for her. And she is now too weak to ask for food.
So she's no longer begging for food.
Right. She cannot eat. She feels really helpless, and there are not many options for her to help her kids. And she told us that although they've been there for only a week at the shelter, that it feels like 60 years for her, because every day has been so difficult on its own.
And have you been in touch with Sama since then?
No, my colleague Amira and I have been trying to reach her for days, but we don't know what Samah and her family are going through now. We don't know if they've gotten better or if they've gotten worse. We don't know if Samah and her children are still alive.
So Hiba, you've watched this change over the last few weeks in Gaza, this real breakdown in conditions on the ground. What are you going to be watching for in the next few weeks?
The next few weeks in Gaza are probably going to be very difficult. The World Health Organization said that they estimate that more people could die at the end of all of this from infectious diseases and hunger than from airstrikes. And we're going to start seeing more and more dire conditions in the south, specifically in Rafah, as more people flee there and as supplies continue to dwindle and as hospitals continue to go out of service. So the next couple of weeks in Gaza are going to be very difficult. And I don't really know what will happen, but I keep thinking back to all the people I've spoken to over the last few weeks, and what they told me is that all they want is to be able to sleep for a full night, uninterrupted, even sleep in their own beds, go back to their homes that they've left, to share a meal with family members, or even see family members that they haven't been able to see for weeks, and to take a warm shower. Just simple daily things that we take for granted, but that feel impossible for people in Gaza.
Hiba, thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina.
We'll be right back.
This podcast is supported by the ACLU. The ACLU needs your support to continue defending the rights of all people nationwide. Right now, our freedoms are under attack. People are traveling hundreds of miles to find abortion care. Transgender kids are banned from accessing critical health care. And our democracy is at stake as states pass voter suppression laws that target Black communities. With an on-the-ground presence in all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico, the ACLU is taking these attacks head-on. Protect everyone's rights. Donate at aclu.org today.
Here's what else you should know today. On Wednesday, European countries struck a major deal to overhaul their migration system in an effort to address surging anti-immigrant sentiment that is fueling the rise of far-right political parties across the continent. The agreement will make it easier to deport failed asylum seekers and to limit entry of migrants into the European Union. It seeks to give governments a greater sense of control over their borders, while bolstering the EU's role in migration, treating it as a European issue, not just a national one. The agreement has been in the works for years, but negotiators were under pressure to finalize it ahead of elections this summer across the bloc's 27 nations. Today's episode was produced by Rochelle Bonja, Ricky Novetsky, Sydney Parker, and Diana Wynn. It was edited by Mark George and Lindsay Garrison, with help from Lisa Chow. Fact-checked by Susan Lee. Contains original music by Dan Powell and Pat McCusker, and was engineered by Chris Wood. Our theme music is by Jim Lundberg and Ben Lancer of Wonderly. Special thanks to Amira Haruda. That's it for the Daily. I'm Sabrina Tavernise. See you tomorrow.
Create joy. Give David Yurman. Founded over 40 years ago by a sculptor and a painter, this luxury jewelry brand creates exquisite designs that spark moments of connection, joyful memories, and unexpected magic. Discover perfect presents for everyone on your list, made with hand-finished details and inspired artistry.
Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are on the rise on college campuses.
To hear a Jewish student or a Muslim student talk about they didn't feel safe, and this is a place where they go to learn, it's supposed to be a special time in their lives, and instead of being able to do that fully, they have to be worried about their physical safety.
One Jewish and one Muslim voice shared their roadmap for a more peaceful way forward for college campuses and for all of us.
You do not cede the moral high ground by dismissing the pain of the other side. You do not become stronger in advocating for your people or advancing your people's goals by denying the other side's humanity.
I'm Nyla. From Axios, this is One Big Thing. As a passionate Muslim and a passionate Jew, we have come together to humbly share a path forward for how to transcend the construct of us versus them and side with humanity instead. That's from a recent open letter to college students across America, written by Daniel Levitsky and Lonnie Ali. Daniel is founder of Kind Snacks and co-founder of the Starts With Us movement and is Jewish. Lonnie Ali, co-founder of the Muhammad Ali Center and wife of the late Muhammad Ali, is Muslim. She's also a founding partner of Starts With Us, which calls itself a movement working to end, quote, polarizing politics and endless culture wars. Lonnie and Daniel have both witnessed the growing hatred on college campuses as the Israel-Hamas war rages on. In a report from the Anti-Defamation League and Hillel International published last month, 73% of Jewish college students surveyed said they had experienced or witnessed anti-Semitic incidents on their campuses since the start of the school year. 44% of non-Jewish students said the same. Before the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, around 67% of Jewish students said they felt very or extremely physically safe on campuses. Since the attack, 46% say they felt safe. All this led to last month's contentious House committee hearing on anti-Semitism on college campuses, which resulted in an angry outcry over university presidents' handling of the problem. FBI data released this fall shows that hate crimes were already at record rates, the highest since the FBI began collecting data. CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations, also reported an increase in Islamophobic and anti-Arab incidents across all ages in the U.S. since the war began, including the stabbing death of 6-year-old Palestinian-American Wadea Al-Fayoumi near Chicago on October 14th. The attacker, who also seriously injured Wadea's mother, has been charged with murder and hate crimes. CARE says that between October 7th and December 2nd, reports of bias or requests for help were up 172% over the same period last year. Lonnie and Daniel say college students themselves are at the heart of the solution. In their open letter, they detail what they call 10 ways to side with humanity, including, quote, "It helps, not hurts your cause, to empathize with the pain of the other side, and to get the full story, pop out of your social media bubble." I sat down with Lonnie and Daniel to talk about overcoming hate and division in this moment. Daniel, Lonnie, welcome to One Big Thing. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you, Nyla.
Thank you, Nyla. We're very energized to be here with you.
Let's talk about what we're seeing on college campuses, because we are seeing hatred and division. I feel like I should say, right, this isn't an oppression Olympics. We're not talking about who has it worse, but anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim sentiment are different. Can I ask how you each explain those differences?
I think for me, it's not that useful to do it that way. And I have a lot of very dear Jewish friends that are upset the pain of my people. I don't find that useful because hate is hate and extremism, and hate ends up begetting more hate and extremism ends up metastasizing to all of it. I've been doing this work for over 30 years, and there's a lot enormous momentum in the places where you might not know it. You know, in the Arab world, there's a lot of people that recognize the need to stand against Islamist fundamentalism, and there's a lot of progress from Muslim voices that are not coming through. And why are they not coming through? Because social media ends up amplifying the voice of the most scandalous extremist voices. The reason Lonnie and I co-wrote a letter for college students with 10 ideas for how they can deal with this moment and be more constructive is that we're realizing the impact of this. But it's very clear that extremism on the Israeli side, extremism on the Palestinian side, cannot represent our people, because we're going to end up landing in a cycle of violence yet again. You can be a proud representative of your people. I'm very proud to be a confused Mexican Jew and a very proud American citizen, and at the same time see the humanity of and build bridges with Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, and recognize that what we need to do is stand up against extremism from any side.
Lonnie, how are you seeing that play out, you think, on American college campuses then?
Well, it's the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses and against Muslim students, and it's just something I did not expect. You know, to hear a Jewish student or a Muslim student talk about they didn't feel safe, and you know, and this is a place where they go to learn. You know, it's supposed to be a special time in their lives, and instead of being able to do that fully, they have to be worried about their physical safety. It's just something that should not be. And as most students today, and a lot of adults, we do get a lot of our news across social media. We look at our phones, you know, and we do need to pop that social media bubble that a lot of students live in, because a lot of them are misinformed. You know, they too are victims in a way of these algorithms. And I think that it's important that they have that dialogue, not in a silo, not with just each other, but with people sitting across from them who may have opposing views. You know, I think it's important that they listen to each other and to feel that same pain that the person across the table is feeling, to be empathetic, to be compassionate, to be curious about that other person and their life story and their journey, you know, how they see it through their eyes. You have to listen critically. You can't just think critically, you have to listen critically. And it's important that I think universities take that step to offer students that opportunity.
I don't know if you know Daniela, but my father was a Holocaust survivor. He was in the Dachau concentration camp. He, like Muhammad Ali, transcended a lot of racism and hate to become kind people that brought light to the world. The knowledge that Tony's talking about that students lack, and knowledge. They're only going to acquire if they are critical thinkers and if they educate themselves deeply, because social media and the way people are, it's very superficial. It's just sensationalistic. You're not going deep to understand the nuance. And you cannot solve problems if you don't understand the other side. And so for you to advance your people's cause, you need to better understand the issues. And then the toolkit for how to develop the skill sets to be problem solvers, rather than to just be screaming. It's about, like Lonnie said, curiosity, compassion, and courage. And these things take a while to build. And instead, what we're seeing young generations be taught rigid dialectics of oppressor versus victim, which don't serve anyone, because you're replacing one form of racism with another. And you need to go deep. When I was at the Muhammad Ali Center and I walked through the museum, it was stunning for me to learn things that I thought I knew that I didn't even know about. You know, do you realize that Muhammad Ali won on behalf of the United States international competition, and then he came back to Louisville and he was denied service. They wouldn't serve him in the restaurant. Like, just to grasp that, to go to a museum, which I did with my daughter with our school, where they teach you about slavery, and to learn how horrible and pernicious that was. Those are interventions that I think are extraordinarily useful, because you understand the history. You should go to the Holocaust Museum, you should go to the Slavery Museum, you should understand the past to prevent them from being repeated. But what you should not do is pigeonhole people into oppressor versus victim, because that's robbing every human being, both the oppressor and the victim, of the personal agency to be a protagonist in their own lives and do something better. You're an oppressor even if you treat people with kindness and respect. You're a victim and have no ability to change your life. We need to really transcend those very simplistic dialectics. And I also want to point out one thing that's very important to remember. Yes, the situation is pretty bad. Yes, there's a lot of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate and intolerance, but let's also keep perspective. You know, at any one campus, I was talking to the head of the Arizona State University or to the head of Hillel there were 8 students that were just really, really, I would say, anti-Semitic and really, really insensitive. There were 200 people that were following with very extremist cries to annihilate Israel and all means necessary. But there's 80,000 students. There's just a lot more silent people that need to recognize that they cannot just be silent anymore, that moderation is not enough, that you need to take action to become a builder. Human beings are moderate. They just want to respect each other. They're not haters. But even if it's a tiny, tiny minority of people that have these extraordinarily extremist agendas, they will stop at nothing, right?
So what is your advice for moderates then, for the people who are listening? What should they do?
You need to become a builder, not just in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Here in our northern shores in the United States, whether you're talking about gun safety and gun rights, when you're talking about choice and abortion on life, whether you're talking about borders, all these issues, 60 to 80% of the people agree on 60 to 80% on all of these issues. To go from moderates to builders, you need to start taking action. And it starts with the simplest of things. Every single day, how do you treat people? Every time you walk in on those college campuses, look at the other side of humanity, particularly the side that you might think that you want to hate. Give them a glance of love and respect. That was Muhammad Ali and Roman Lubetsky. You know, my dad was an extraordinary human being. He was not as famous as Muhammad, but that's what they both had, right? That kindness in their heart. And Lonnie always talks to me about that. They didn't know a stranger. Like, treat everybody as the human that they are. Give them the permission to be human, and then start building bridges. Don't immediately dehumanize and attack.
Let me say this too. Muhammad was an extraordinary man, just like Daniel's father. And he was celebrated in the West Bank in Gaza, just like he was in Israel. He went to both. He was celebrated in all of those places. And why? Because he had that love for all people, and they all recognized it. And I think, and I said a lot about the universities, but I should also say that we as parents, as grandparents, aunts and uncles, it's our duty too to teach the children, our children, to show that compassion and understanding every day, and it does take courage sometimes to walk across to somebody that you don't agree with, that may look different from you, and find common ground with that person. But you should be curious enough to do that and to have the compassion to understand their path in life, where they came from. And that's what Muhammad did. He always met people with no agenda. He didn't care where they came from, what their background was, what life baggage they carried with them. He always was able to go through all of that and see the humanity, no matter how deeply it might be buried in that person. He was always able to see that and to touch that humanity.
In a moment, more with Lonnie Ali and Daniel Levetsky, plus a look at new challenges for DEI programs on college campuses. This is One Week There.
What if every work email you got was so short you could fit on one screen, and so clear you knew exactly what was needed? You'd see right away what's really new and why it matters to you. That's possible with Axios HQ, a new tool built by Axios, helping teams communicate with the same clarity and efficiency of our best newsletter writers. It's already taking off at Fortune 100 companies and startups too. Learn more at AxiosHQ.com.
Welcome back to One Big Thing from Axios. I'm Nyla. Lonnie Ali of the Muhammad Ali Center and Daniel Levetsky of Kind Snacks are my guests this week, talking about building bridges during a moment of hate and division. Daniel, you've been a longtime advocate for business as a tool of peace, going back to when you were in college. As you're thinking about harnessing that energy, can you explain how you think about business as a way to foster peace in a situation as seemingly intractable as what we're seeing in Israel and Gaza?
When the war ends, we're going to need to reconstruct. We're going to need to create a Marshall Plan with accountability. What do I mean by a Marshall Plan with accountability? We're going to need to business leaders in the United States, in Europe, in the Arab world, in Israel, in Palestine. Entrepreneurs are going to need to work to build hospitals and schools and jobs and apartments and opportunities. And we're going to need to equip the Israelis and the Palestinians with the responsibility and the duty to be part of the solution and guide us to confidence-building measures and attach all of the aid that we need to raise to concrete positive-building measures. Because otherwise, if the money just flows and then Hamas steals it, if the money just flows and we don't tie it to the citizens on the ground having the power and the responsibility to be part of the solution, we'll face this again in 5, 10, 20 years. It's been happening. We need to break that cycle by starting to invest in a sustainable way where we recognize each other's humanity. That means people on the ground voting with their feet and saying, I affirm that I'm going to be part of that solution. And if so, here you go, we're going to invest in you. But everybody needs to slowly but surely start building towards it.
Lonnie, can I ask you to just end by what your message is to American college students now?
That really the light is shining on them at this moment here. They can be the force for change. They can be the positive path forward and show the world the way it should be, the dialogue that should take place, the bridges that should be built, the understanding that should be held, and the compassion that should be felt. And I think that if we are able to give them those tools that they need to advance that kind of action, we would have met our purpose here with our initiative in our letter to students on college campuses. Don't let social media and misunderstanding, misinformation divide us here in America. Don't let that happen. There is an opportunity for us to be those people that we want the world to look at and to be like, there has to be an understanding of compassion toward the Jewish student on campus and the Muslim student on campus, or any student on campus who is fearful and afraid for whatever reasons. And we do have to be that solution.
Lonnie, Daniel, thank you both for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nyla.
Thank you, Nyla. And Lonnie, I sent you a gigantic hug.
Yes.
One side effect of the volatility we're seeing on college campuses is that DEI initiatives are in the crosshairs. That's according to Axios reporter Erica Pandy. I asked her to tell us more.
So what's happening is that conservatives who've had diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in their sights for a long time are saying that the anti-Semitism we're seeing on campuses, that university professors' testimony we saw where they failed to answer a pretty simple question about anti-Semitism, is all related to these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And they're saying that colleges have been so focused on supporting certain groups that they're neglecting other groups. I spoke to Stacey Burdett, who's an anti-Semitism expert and was a VP at the Anti-Defamation League, about this issue. And she said that this moment is exposing a real hole in DEI, which is that maybe it hasn't historically included Jewish students and accounted for Jewish fear. But she said the solution might be to expand DEI rather than to take it away when evidence shows that it does help a lot of minority groups with feeling included on campus with higher matriculation rates. One thing we're watching is there have been bills in at least 20 states to limit or defund DEI. That's according to the Chronicle of Higher Education. So expect this anti-DEI groundswell at universities to just keep growing.
That's Erica Pandy, reporter and author of the Axios Finish Line newsletter. And that's all for this week's edition of One Big Thing. You can always send feedback by texting me at 202-918-4893 or emailing podcasts@axios.com. The One Big Thing team includes supervising producer Alexandra Voti and sound engineer Jay Cowan. Alex Sugiyara composed our theme music. Asia Whitaker-Moore is Axios' executive editor, and Sarah Kailani Gu is Axios' editor-in-chief. I'm Nyla Boodoo. Thanks for listening. Stay safe. Right. We'll be back with you here next Thursday for one final pod for the year and a look ahead to what's next in 2024.
What if every work email you got was so short it could fit on one screen, and so clear you knew exactly what was needed? You'd see right away what's really new and why it matters to you. That's possible with Axios HQ, a new tool built by Axios, helping teams communicate with the same clarity and efficiency of our best newsletter writers. It's already taking off at Fortune 100 companies and startups too. Learn more at AxiosHQ.com.
LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. I'm handing over the reins this week to my producer, Caleb, who's going to share with you a special conversation. It's about ambition, adventure, politics, and what it takes to make a dent in the world. Here's Caleb to tell you more.
I want to introduce you to the most interesting person you've probably never heard of. His name is Rory Stewart, and here are just a few highlights from his dramatic resume. He went to then to work as a diplomat, and some said spy, in Indonesia and Montenegro. He walked across Afghanistan alone just a few months after 9/11. And he wrote a book about the adventure that the New York Times called a flat-out masterpiece. He served as the deputy governor of 2 Iraqi provinces, and later was tapped by King Charles to set up a nonprofit in Afghanistan that helped rebuild the old city of Kabul. After that, he was given a chair at Harvard and invited to prepare a strategy for President Obama.
Freakonomics Radio is sponsored by American Express. The enhanced American Express Business Gold Card is designed to take your business further. It's packed with benefits like 4 times membership rewards points that adapt to your top 2 eligible spending categories every month on up to $150,000 in purchases per year, and up to $395 in annual statement credits on eligible purchases at select business merchants. The Amex Business Gold Card, now smarter and more flexible. That's the powerful backing of American Express. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/businessgoldcard. Freakonomics Radio is sponsored by Capital One Bank. With no fees or minimums, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than deciding to listen to another episode of your favorite podcast. And with no overdraft fees, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank. Capital One NA, member FDIC. Hey there, it's Stephen Dubner. This is the time of year we like to play for you some of the other shows we've been making for the Freakonomics Radio Network. Today, an episode of No Stupid Questions with Angela Duckworth and Mike Maughan. We started this show a few years ago with me as Angela's co-host, but when it came time to replace myself, well, I think you'll agree that Mike has done brilliantly. Mike is an executive with Qualtrics and does a variety of other interesting things. Angela, in case you don't know, is a research psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania and author of the book Grit. I hereby predict that you will love this episode of No Stupid Questions and that you will immediately follow the show on your podcast app. So don't make a liar out of me. As always, thanks for listening.
Yeah, that was basically psychology 100 years ago. It's just like, what's this restaurant? And let me tell you what happened. I'm Angela Duckworth.
I'm Mike Maughan.
And you're listening to No Stupid Questions.
Today, on a special episode of the show, do you need closure in order to move on?
When a lottery gets to over $1 billion, I call a friend in another state and Venmo him some money.
Mike, we have an email from Shreya Bhargava, and it is something I have long wanted to talk about.
Let's go.
Hi, Mike and Angela. I recently read about the Zeigarnik effect and wanted to ask, is it true that people remember unfinished or interrupted tasks better than completed tasks? And could this be extrapolated to human relationships? Do relationships that have no closure stick around in our heads more than the ones we've been able to resolve and amicably close?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, your like knee-jerk reaction is yes. When you have closure, it's totally different. It leaves your head. Is that your intuition?
Yeah. And just in general, I love closure. I appreciate closure. Even the Irish exit drives me insane.
Wait, what's the Irish exit?
It's when someone just like leaves and doesn't say goodbye. They just slip out of a party.
Why is it called the Irish? Do Irish people do that?
I actually have no idea.
You look around and you're like, where's the Irish friend I had?
Maybe it's a terrible thing to say now. I actually don't know.
It could be wildly inappropriate. I've done it before though. I mean, haven't you done that, by the way? Like, you go to a wedding reception and you think strategically, I'm going to be super visible, like you're in the line of sight of the bride, the groom, and the bride's family, and the groom's family. But then, you know, in this moment where everybody's distracted, they're throwing the bouquet or something. Like, I've totally snuck out. Have you not done that?
No, I agree with you 100%. I've also done that. I'm thinking about a wedding I went to this summer, and the minute everyone was distracted and I made FaceTime with enough people, beeline to the car, and then it was weeks later that the groom was like, wait, were you there for the dancing? And I was like, oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was great.
That might be your first confession to me of fibbing ever.
Oh.
Now I have to reevaluate everything. We're going to have to get closure on this, or it's going to keep bothering me. But until then, I might be thinking about it. And that is actually the Zygarnik effect, right? So, you know, this email from Shreya asks, is the Zygarnik effect real? And I guess I should tell you what it is. I don't know that you've heard about it, but...
I'm not.
So the Zygarnik effect is attributed to Bluma Zygarnik. She was a psychologist, and she was a student nearly a century ago. She studied with Kurt Lewin. He was a great psychologist himself. Zygarnik says that she was in a restaurant, and she observed that the waiter could keep in their head just like a ridiculous number of orders and drinks and who's getting what and have they been served. So she's just marveling at this, and she's like, how is it that you can keep all these things in your head? But then she's even more astonished because, and this is a little bit like myth now, you know, she did write about it, but I think it's been maybe embroidered as myths are.
We mythologize all things that are cool.
We do, so maybe this is a bit of a screen-written ending, but after the waiter serves everyone's food and serves it correctly, what happens is they finish eating, this large group that Bluma Zygarnik's part of, and one person, you know, legend has it, goes back to retrieve an item that they left behind. And this guest spots the waiter and asks for help and thinks that, oh, this waiter, who can obviously remember everything, would remember where they were sitting. And the waiter looks at this dinner guest and seemingly has no idea who they even are, much less where they sat and whether they had left something behind. And so the waiter had kind of like erased the hard drive of memory once the task was finished. So the Zygarnik effect refers to keeping in our minds unfinished tasks. And when we have closure, when something is checked off or resolved, then that thing exiting our mind, that's the myth.
Here's a really interesting corollary, and this is maybe why I believe it, because I went to school. Tell me if I'm way off on this. I mean, how often did you cram before a test? You have all this information in your head, or maybe not even cramming, but you study, you get ready, and then you take the test, and then it's all gone. I have the closure of having finished the class or taken the test, and it just flows into the ether.
I had not thought about that, Mike, but I think that would be an excellent demonstration of the Zygarnik effect. For me, what is salient is being a professor. Sometimes I will put up a slide in my class, and it will be like verbatim, the main point of the last class, sort of like, a goal is defined as blank, right? And I think to myself, well, class was only a week ago. I spent 3 hours in every possible way demonstrating these definitions. My students love me. They love this class. They have readings to do on this subject. And I am sometimes astonished at the sub 100% accuracy of these easy to me questions.
Right.
But one could argue that if you are just like, oh great, that class is over, or I've taken that quiz, like I don't need to know that anymore. I mean, the Zygarnik effect is narrowly speaking about unfinished tasks. But you could also just say, like, you know, someone tells you a passcode or a phone number, and you're like mentally rehearsing it in your head, 724, 724,
Yes.
724, and then you like type in 724, and then you have no idea afterwards.
And sometimes I can't even hold on long enough until I need to.
Oh, I know. But okay, so Bluma Zygarnik lived a century ago, and she had these observations, but let's just say that Bluma Zygarnik was not running a lot of randomized controlled experiments.
She was going to restaurants.
Yeah, that was basically psychology 100 years ago. She's like, what's this restaurant? Let me tell you what happened. So more recently, two social psychologists, E.J. Masicampo and Roy Baumeister, they had the idea of doing an experiment to see whether Bluma Zygarnik was right and whether it was really true that unfulfilled goals persist in our minds until they are fulfilled and then they exit. I'll just give you an example of one of the studies they did to show that there really is a Zygarnik effect. They said, you know, the thing is that when you're doing something and you have to keep it in your head, like 724, 724, 724, it's like an unfinished task, it eats up cognitive bandwidth. And it gives you, by the way, an idea of why the brain doesn't actually remember 724 after it doesn't need to, because you want that cognitive bandwidth to do something else. We only keep in our minds active what we need to. And so they just ran these clever experiments where, for example, they gave people something to read that they needed to focus on, like a passage from a novel.
Right.
And if you had a task assigned to you that you had not yet completed, that you knew you were going to have to do afterwards, you were more likely to mind wander and to understand less of what you're reading. I mean, the analogy would be if I go to a meeting and I know that there was this one thing that I wanted to email before I went to the meeting, but I ran out of time. What they found in this experiment is that you're a little distracted the whole time you're doing this intermediary task by the task that you have not yet finished, but you know you have to.
But is that not everything in life? I mean, how often
do you finish everything that you need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I keep a pad of paper by my bed, and as I'm going to bed, the lights are off, I've already fallen asleep, and I wake back up, and it's like, oh my gosh, didn't do this, close my eyes, wake back up, didn't do this.
Okay, so you write things down on the pad before you go to sleep?
Right, so then in the morning I'll remember to do them, but when have you gone to a meeting and
okay, wait. I want to go back to the pad.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's doing two things. One is when we write things down, it's just externalizing memory.
Yes.
So if you're not going to forget the 5 things that you were supposed to do, that you didn't do, that you need to do in the morning, great. But the other thing is you're keeping those things out of the buffer of your head. So you're allowing yourself, for example, I assume, to like just go to sleep and not be 724. And that's what Missy Campo and Baumeister found. In a way, it's like the antidote to this kind of preoccupation we have with unfinished tasks. Because you're right, Mike, this happens all the time. But also, all the time, we make plans. And what they found in these experiments is that if the volunteer in the experiment who was being subject to the Zeigarnik effect, if they had an opportunity to write about a thing that they were supposed to do, basically write down a plan, then they didn't suffer from the Zeigarnik effect. So the idea that you have of keeping that pad of paper and a pen at your bedside, and I keep, as you know, like this $1 notebook, you know, those cheap composition notebooks. I have this system where on the right side of those pages, I take my notes, they're all dated, I can go back to my lab notebooks from my very first year of graduate school because I have them all. But on the left side of these pages, which are often blank, if I'm in a meeting or doing something, I'm in a main task, but in my head, you know, you ever have those little thought bubbles and you're like, oh, I forgot to buy milk, right? Like, oh, I have to email that person.
I have maybe 4,000 of them a day, and it's very distracting.
So I have all these plans, and as soon as I write them down, they're out of my head. I don't have to remember 724, because the next time I open my notebook, it's just there for you.
So part of it is this externalization of memory, and that allows us the quote-unquote closure of that task, whether it be done or not, so that we can then focus on what's right in front of us.
Yeah, I think that the way to think about it is your brain is doing what it needs to do. It's prioritizing. And the brain is relieved of the responsibility of keeping something in its working memory, like the kind of active memory of the brain.
Yeah.
Because you know that you've written it down, you know you've made a plan, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. This is, some would argue, one of the great leaps forward for human civilization when we have writing. It's a way of externalizing all the things that you don't have to like keep in your working memory or frankly even in your long-term memory because you can go look it up. But this general idea is, yes, you can free up the brain to do things that it more urgently needs to do because you have externalized.
Still to come on this special episode of No Stupid Questions, Angela and Mike discuss how the Zeigarnik effect comes up in our relationships with other people.
Me and Mike Vaughn, a little bit of mystery goes a long way.
Freakonomics Radio is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Give yourself the gift of insane savings this holiday season with Mint Mobile's best wireless deal of the year. There's no better gift than turning an overpriced wireless bill into just $15 a month with Mint Mobile. All plans come with unlimited talk and text, plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. For a limited time, get 6 months of free service when you buy a select device and plan. Or use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and switch easily and effortlessly with eSIM. For a limited time, buy any 3-month Mint Mobile plan and get 3 more months free by going to mintmobile.com/freak. That's mintmobile.com/freak. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/freak. Freakonomics Radio is sponsored by Lowe's Hotels. With 25 locations coast to coast across the U.S. and Canada, Lowe's portfolio is grounded in family heritage and dedicated to a handcrafted approach. Lowe's Hotels make continuous efforts to welcome you like family, taking pride in every detail and approaching each moment of your stay with care, intuition, and thoughtfulness, so that from the moment you arrive, you feel at home. And with Chat Your Service, anything you need is right at your fingertips. It's that personalized service that makes traveling with Lowe's that much more relaxed. This holiday season, give the gift of Lowe's with a gift card for your loved ones to enjoy irresistibly sweet deals, curated sips, and festive sounds. For reservations or more information about Lowe's Hotels, call 1-800-23-LOWES or visit loweshotels.com. That's 1-800-235-6397 or LOEWS
Now, back to Angela Duckworth and Mike Maughn's conversation about closure and the Zygarnik effect on No Stupid Questions.
So, Mike, when it comes to the Zygarnik effect, I think, in a way, the more interesting thing is what happens emotionally. And my favorite thinkers on this are Tim Wilson and Dan Gilbert, and they are psychologists who have this idea that we all have, like, psychological immune systems.
What?
I know, right?
Meaning something that keeps me healthy psychologically?
Yes! Just like the body regulates its temperature and its blood pressure and its metabolism, we also regulate the processing of emotion.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Right?
But sometimes we're so... Well, I should not speak. I am so bad at that.
You? I think you are so even-keeled.
But I think all of us have moments where we get thrown off base.
Yeah.
The times when I think I'm least regulated emotionally, maybe, are the times when I have so much to do and am feeling immense time pressure, and I just need people to be efficient and do their job and do it well, and I don't have a ton of time to explain or walk through or be patient. And those are the moments when I have the greatest regret, because maybe I've acted inappropriately because I'm so under time pressure and other pressures.
So in such a stressful situation, in one word, what would you describe your mood or your emotion as?
Deep frustration is probably the emotion that explodes out.
Okay, so let's think of a time recently where you were stressed and people around you were not doing what they needed to do when they needed to do it, and you got frustrated. And then I want to ask you, you're not frustrated now, right? So tell me the story of what happens with that frustration.
So I recently was going through an experience where I was supposed to meet with this person.
This unnamed person.
And I needed an introduction to this person from somebody else. And it just never happened. I talked to the person. I said, hey, will you set up the meeting? Didn't do it. Hey, I need to have this meeting. Didn't do it. So I'm growing increasingly frustrated, and I think I'm going to send them a text that's kind of loaded and darn it, just do your job type of thing.
Yeah.
And instead, I waited, and then the next time I saw the individual, I said to them, hey, we're supposed to be having this meeting. Can you help me understand? Are you avoiding it because you don't want me to meet with that person? Or you feel threatened by my involvement there, or you don't care? I just need to understand, why are you not doing this? And I forced the conversation for them to then explain, because I think so often we don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation, or we don't want to tell them the real reason, so we just avoid.
So did you get the explanation that you wanted?
I got the explanation. This person just said, hey, I don't think it's the right time. I'm working on this through them. I think that we'll be better off if we do it this way. Okay, maybe we disagree with strategy, or maybe I agree with that strategy, but regardless, I'd never been told that strategy. And none of us on our side had. So we got some level of closure.
Yeah, and then what happened to your emotion? Were you as frustrated before and after the explanation, or did your frustration diminish, which is what Tim Wilson and Dan Gilbert, that's their big theory, that emotions linger when there's lack of closure, and emotions end when we do have explanations about what's going on.
Yeah.
What happened for you?
I would say that my frustration with the lack of action diminished, and then a new frustration grew that either I did not present myself in such a way that this person felt they could be fully honest with me, and frustration that they didn't feel that. So it was kind of a mutual, hey, if I'm not being the kind of person that you can talk to, then I need to fix that, or you need to give me feedback, or let's figure that out, versus just avoidance.
So I'll try to give an accounting for how emotion works and when we continue to feel frustrated and when we stop feeling frustrated. And by the way, I want to say this applies to positive feelings too. The idea is that our feelings linger, whether they're positive feelings like joy or negative feelings like frustration. They stop when we have a complete accounting for what happened. So the idea of you being frustrated with this colleague, according to this theory, that once they explain to you why they didn't want to have the meeting, at least a certain kind of frustration should have gone down, because you're like, oh, I get it. Now you could have a new frustration, but that new frustration is because now you don't understand why you don't have the sort of relationship where they wouldn't have just told you in the first place. And when you get closure on that, the prediction is that you'll, again, feel a diminishing of that frustration. So our emotions go up and down with closure, or lack thereof.
That makes perfect sense to me in negative emotions.
This doesn't make sense to you for positive emotions.
For positive emotion, do I want closure on joy? I feel like I want that to keep going. And it's
yes.
Oh, that was so beautiful, and now I have closure, and I know I feel joy. That seems terrible.
Yeah. So let me tell you about one of their studies where they asked college students to read text messages from other students.
Okay.
In this case, they were students from the opposite sex who had evaluated them positively. Now, if you were uncertain about which student had actually written the message, then your positive mood lingers longer than when you do know. This reminds me, in high school, we used to have this Valentine's Day fundraiser every year, and you could send carnations to someone, right?
Yes, okay, I was gonna say, that's what we did too. It's always carnations.
It's always carnations, it's so cheap.
Dime a dozen, yeah.
Exactly. Maybe literally. So, you could, of course, sign the note, or you could choose not to.
Or you could put, an admirer or whatever.
Exactly. Why is it so intriguing to have a secret admirer? It's because, you have lack of closure, and, explanations bring an end to emotion. And I think you're right, Mike. You might not want that. So
no, that makes sense. When you phrase it that way, I get it. I also think, and maybe this is not at all the same thing, but part of playing the lottery, they always say, is not actually about winning the lottery, because the chances are so small.
Yeah.
But it's when you buy the ticket, there's this anticipatory effect where you think about all the fun things you could do, and it brings so much joy just thinking about oh, this would be amazing, and then it doesn't happen, but nobody ever actually expects it to happen anyway.
And that whole time when there's lack of closure, you get to marinate in your low probability fantasies about what you're going to do when you win the lottery.
Exactly, and it's actually really, really fun.
You have never played the lottery, Mike Mon, have you?
I live in Utah. It's actually illegal here, but
Wait, what?
You can't buy lottery tickets in Utah.
You don't have a lottery in Utah?
We do not, no.
Can I just say that I need to move to Utah? Because lotteries, okay, this is a totally different topic, but I think lotteries exploit the general human inability to understand low probability phenomena. They're kind of evil, TBH.
I actually agree, and obviously all the data shows what you're saying is that they're almost a regressive tax. So all of the moral arguments that I agree with are why lotteries are bad. So now I'm going to confess something that you're going to hate. When a lottery gets to over $1 billion,
yeah,
I call a friend in another state.
No.
And Venmo him. like I've been caught right now.
Holy
and I'm confessing.
schmoly.
But only because I just think it's fun
It's so
to
darn fun.
have the like opportunity to just fantasize for a little bit about everything I know I'm not gonna win.
Yeah.
But it's almost like paying the $10 to go see a movie. I pay $10 to spend 3 days thinking about what I would do with the lottery winnings. And that's really fun. And then I get closure that clearly it didn't work.
Yeah.
As you're saying, the positive emotion goes away. But it was a really fun 3 days, and I'm okay with that.
And you don't totally know you're not going to win.
Well, but I'm pretty sure.
Pretty sure, right? Yeah, you're no quantitative idiot, but you also know that the probability isn't zero. So I think relatedly, one of my favorite studies that Tim Wilson and Dan Gilbert ever did, they had this study where they approached students, undergraduates who are studying in the library, and they give them an index card. And the index card has a dollar coin attached to it. So it's kind of like cool and unusual.
Yeah.
Now there's two conditions. In the uncertain condition, the card conveys this vague information about the source and purpose of the money. It's signed by the Smile Society and just says, like, we like to promote random acts of kindness, but it's sort of like, what? I'm in the library, you just handed me a card. That's the uncertain condition. Then there's the certain condition. Students in the library, they get handed an index card, it's got a dollar coin taped to it, except now, each of those elements of information are preceded with a very helpful question. Instead of just the Smile Society, which you're like, what? It's preceded with, who are we? The Smile Society. And then instead of just getting, we like to promote random acts of kindness, you get, why do we do this? We like to promote random acts of kindness.
And it asks the question for me to maybe anchor me in understanding or...
Yeah.
Okay, I see that.
So that's the clever little experiment. So I'm going to give you a little closure now, because you may have guessed what's going to happen.
Because I need closure. I'm a person that needs closure.
Yes, let me give it to you. So Tim Wilson and Dan Gilbert knew all about the Zeigarnik effect. In fact, that was one of the inspirations for their theory. And the prediction would be that when you do have this closure, where you're like, oh, I know why I got this dollar coin, and I know who these people are, that the positive emotions would end sooner. And that's exactly what they found. So these students who were studying the library and getting these cards, then they were approached by another experimenter a few minutes later, and they were asked to complete a survey. And those who had received the certain card, meaning the card with the questions that explained everything that was going on, were actually in a less positive mood than those who had received the uncertain card.
That's so interesting.
So you're exactly right, Mike. You can use this to make your negative emotions go away sooner, and you can use this to make your positive emotions linger if you can find ways to forestall or delay closure.
This is so interesting. I mean, there's this Valentine's book that we always read as kids called Somebody Loves You, Mr. Hatch.
Is this the Mon family?
Yes, this is the Mon family.
Oh, gosh, I want to be part of this family.
I'll mail you this book. It's an awesome book. But there's this older gentleman, lives alone, never had a family, and he gets this big box of chocolates that says, somebody loves you. And it talked about how before he ate the same crappy sandwich every day and ate alone at his job at a shoelace factory and had no friends.
The shoelace factory.
I mean, they portray this as a very sad situation. But the point is, the guy's life completely changes because, quote, somebody loves you.
But he doesn't know who, right?
Yeah, right. He's like, maybe it was the person I buy the paper from. Maybe it was someone at work. Maybe it was the neighbors. And he becomes so involved in his community, and he starts making brownies and inviting people over and all this. And then the postman comes back and says, Mr. Hatch, I'm in a lot of trouble. I delivered this to the wrong house.
Wait, and then what happens?
Gotta read the book. Just kidding, I'll tell you.
Okay.
What basically happens is then the postman tells everyone in town, hey, I made this mistake, and then it ends with this beautiful, like, everybody loves you, Mr. Hatch, and they have this party.
Aww.
But the whole thing that changed his life in this very short fictional children's story,
to be clear,
was not knowing who, quote, loved him, and therefore he went on this journey to find out, could it be any of these people, and it opened up a whole new world to him of, like, opportunity to build relationships and anticipation of positive things.
A little bit of mystery, Mike Mon. A little bit of mystery goes a long way. Look, I do want to give you some advice from John Gottman.
Okay.
John Gottman is the most famous couples counseling / how to have a good relationship. So what does Gottman say? I'm going to read to you from The Science of Trust, Emotional Attunement for Couples. And it's about how couples can build a healthy, trusting relationship. And he says, negative events in couple relationships are inevitable.
Yes.
The way relationships fail is through something called the Zeigarnik effect. If a couple's negative events are not fully processed, that's what he calls attunement, right? Like getting to closure. If they're not fully processed, then they're remembered and rehearsed repeatedly.
Oh, yes.
Turned over and over in each person's mind. And then he says that you find some way to get a kind of closure by attributing blame to the other person. It kind of spirals. And he says the potential role of the Zeigarnik effect is colossal. If we engage in attuned processing, right, getting to closure of a negative emotional event or regrettable incident with our partner, we will only foggily remember it. The details will become hazy and the event insignificant. On the other hand, if we dismiss and avoid processing a negative emotional event, it will not disappear. It will fester, ready to be triggered again. Gottman continues, this is why attuning, right, getting closure to a negative, regrettable incident is so incredibly important. Like the Viennese waiters in Zeigarnik's cafe, if partners avoid processing the incident with attunement, the event and its negative emotion will lie inside each partner like an improvised explosive device, an IED, ready to explode if inadvertently stepped on.
Let me give you an amen and a hallelujah. Going back to a relationship I had, this is 15, 20 years ago, I don't know, it's a long time ago. Anyway, this person lived in New York, I lived in Arizona.
Men died. Dunson's widow, Erica, choked back tears as attorney Fanon Rucker announced the suit.
I don't know that there are enough words in English language, I don't know if there are enough letters in the alphabet to describe how this has impacted Ms. Dunson and the rest of the family.
The lawsuit seeks a jury trial and whatever damages a jury sees fit. Rucker says they also hope it will send the message that police must act responsibly. Springfield Township says Unwin was responding to an officer needs assistance call when the crash happened, but otherwise declined to comment on pending litigation. Tana Weingartner, 91.7 WVXU.
New federal data says the number of Ohioans experiencing homelessness grew almost 7% last year. But one local expert says the point-in-time count is often inaccurate. Kevin Finn is president of Strategies to End Homelessness, the lead agency coordinating services in Hamilton County.
In a one-day count, it's really easy to miss people who are experiencing homelessness. But when you count 365 days of the year, and you have people who are out looking for people sleeping on the streets and that sort of thing on a basically constant basis, there's much less chance that you would miss someone.
Finn says the local data shows thousands more people are experiencing homelessness compared with the federal report. One thing in common is both data sets show decline in local homelessness last year. Finn says any data is better than having none at all. Accuracy matters when it comes to deciding how to spend limited funding, respond to, and to prevent homelessness. You can read more at WVXU.org. Cloudy tonight, an overnight low of 31. Slight chance of rain tomorrow, a high of 52 with mostly cloudy skies. It's 49 degrees now.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Fisher Investments. As a fiduciary, Fisher Investments is obligated to act in their client's best interest. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com. Investments in securities involve the risk of loss. From the law firm Cooley LLP, with offices in the U.S., Europe, and Asia, Cooley advises entrepreneurs, investors, financial institutions, and established companies around the world, where innovation meets the law. And from the Doris Duke Foundation.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Wanda Summers. The question at the heart of Alice McDermott's latest book is, what do you sacrifice in order to do something good for someone else? The author's answer is told through the story of Trisha, a young wife who's moved to 1963 Saigon with her new husband, an engineer loaned to the Navy.
She is a stranger in a strange land in many ways. A working class girl, first to go to college in her family, an all-girl Catholic school in Manhattan, and she's following her up-and-coming, rising into the upper classes husband to Saigon. She's not quite sure why there are so many American engineers in Saigon in 1963, but she sees herself, as many women of that era did, as a helpmeet to her husband.
Almost immediately, Trisha is swept up into the world of another Saigon wife, Charlene.
She sort of burst into the novel in much the same way she burst into Trisha's life. My first reaction was very much like Trisha's, like, oh God, I know this type. You know, the pushy corporate wife, getting you to do things you don't want to do and smarter than everybody else. But she also is very philosophical about her role in the world. She disapproves of human suffering.
The story of the relationship between the two women is recounted through letters, decades later, between Trisha and Charlene's daughter, Rainey.
I think what that distance does is, number one, it gives Trisha an opportunity to tell her story, because a woman of that era would say, my husband was doing the important things. But also Rainey, who's a child in 1963, asked Trisha, do you remember me? Do you remember my mother? And that gives Trisha permission to remember.
And as Trisha remembers that relationship with her polar opposite Charlene, what the two women gave each other all those years ago in Saigon and what they learned about life becomes clear.
Female relationships are where you can have some of the most interesting conversations, because nobody's stopping to mansplain that you don't have the politics right or the history right. And again, when you're dealing with women of this era, basic things they didn't know about their bodies, basic things they didn't know about childbirth and miscarriage. Miscarriage was not spoken of. Yes, it was a failing, but in some ways, because it wasn't spoken of, it made it seem even worse. But women could speak to one another about that. So in some ways, Charlene is a guide for Trisha through this world, but she's also an opportunity for Trisha to discover what she thinks and how she feels. She pushes Trisha into some uncomfortable places, but also enlarges her sense of what she can do in the world.
What do you think it is that Trisha pushes Charlene to do, or challenges Charlene? What do you think her role is? You talked about how Charlene pushes her into uncomfortable places, but what about Trisha's end of the bargain?
Yeah. At one point, Trisha describes how she gives a phrase that Trisha has learned, the Hebrew Midrash of Tikkun Olam, repair the world. And she gives it to Charlene because she sees this as kind of what Charlene, in her limited circumstances, wants to do. Charlene turns right back and says, yeah, but the Buddhists say, mend yourself. And in some ways, that's the heart of the question that Charlene proposes to Trisha. Do you go out and battle against this human suffering that is insurmountable, or do you lock the door and say, I'm just going to take care of what I'm meant to take care of?
Trisha is very eager to grow her family and to have a child, but she does have these multiple miscarriages, and there is this beautiful but incredibly devastating scene in your book after Trisha has a miscarriage after about 3 months of pregnancy, and Charlene comes to visit her, and there's this moment that I will not forget where the two of them are looking at that embryo together, and Charlene baptizes it. Can you just talk about that scene and that moment?
In some ways, I think this is the moment where Charlene, the stereotype,
to Arizona, can we date? They moved out to Arizona, didn't talk to her for a year.
Wait, why?
I don't know, I'm just dumb. I don't have a good reason. But the point is that we then did date, and this fight came up over and over a million.
Oh, the fight about, like, what happened.
But then you didn't even call me for a year. And then you didn't call me for a year. So, like, I don't know how to take Godwin's advice on this, because I was like, I don't know what else to say. I was wrong. I'm sorry. You're right.
Oh, but it wasn't a sufficient explanation then for this anonymous person.
Okay, see, this is what I guess we're getting to. There was never closure. This is not what...
Chinese fashion behemoth Shein is one of the fastest growing companies in the world, which means the people of planet Earth like it. But it has so many critics. Designers say Shein steals from them.
Shein straight up just stole my pirouette sport design.
Influencers say they've been misled.
I make mistakes. I'm imperfect. I'm forever growing and evolving, and that's like probably one of my favorite things about myself.
Danny's sorry about that trip to China. Congress said Shein's being deceptive about who makes the clothes.
Consumers don't, all things being equal, want to purchase goods that are contaminated by slave labor or forced labor.
And a Vogue editor says the clothes are just not that good.
These are not very well made clothing. They are not made to last.
On Today Explained, as Shein flirts with going public, an episode we first ran earlier this year on why this hated company is so beloved and why this beloved company is so hated.
Support for Today Explained comes from BetterHelp. The holidays can be a lot of fun, like, you know, parties and reconnecting with friends and family, but it's not for everyone. Some people don't like that stuff, and the holidays could keep you from feeling those sad feelings, or at least help you through a tough time. If you're looking for convenient, affordable online therapy, you might want to try BetterHelp. You can find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/explain today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/explained.
Hey there, beautiful people. I'm journalist and author Tre'vell Anderson, and I'm hosting the official Rustin podcast. We're diving into the man, the moment, and the movement at the center of the Netflix film.
Well, the stakes were so severe. People were getting killed from registering people to vote.
He was a pioneer in the sense that he really was a true radical. You are absolutely going to want to listen. I promise you that. Subscribe now wherever you get Slayworthy podcasts.
It's Today Explained. I'm Noelle King with Hillary Milnes, the Executive Americas Editor at Vogue Business. She does not shop at Shein.
I have to say the user experience on the website, it's just not for me.
It's fine. She works at Vogue. But the user experience on the website is, for so many people, that Shein dwarfs other fast fashion companies like H&M and Zara and is valued today at $66 billion.
That's more than Zara and H&M combined. And so I think when people bucket them together, what doesn't really come, into play or isn't really that common of knowledge if you don't know the fashion industry that well is just how big Shein is compared to these other companies. And at the core of its business model is a very reactive, technology-based, algorithm-driven response cycle that can pick up trends very quickly as they're happening. They're tapped into what's happening on social media, on the internet, and regurgitating these trends as they're coming into popularity. And a big thing that Shein often talks about is that they then seed, some styles onto the website, and then only if they start to perform will they mass produce them. So that's something that other fast fashion companies have done as well, but Shein is uploading like 10,000 products a day, so it's just a massive operation.
Give me an example of one of the trends that they've jumped on.
The parachute pant, we're seeing that's very popular. I know like a lot of Gen Zs are really into that Y2K style. And so you'll see like the baggy low-rise jeans, the parachute pant, the crop top. It's weirdly reminiscent of like the mall fashion that we were all shopping. But you can look and see, Kendall Jenner spotting wearing, a designer's parachute pant. We actually recently wrote about the designer that, first became popular with the ones that were being worn by Kendall Jenner and Bella Hadid. Then that, filters its way directly to Shein, and that used to take time, and it now takes no time at all.
A thing can show up in photos and it can be like, wow, that looks really good. That should be a trend. That will be a trend. But it's supposed to take time to then make the thing. How does it make these things so quickly?
Shein has accumulated a network of thousands. I saw 3,000, I saw 6,000. Exactly how many, I'm not sure, but they have a really big network of manufacturers that are making clothing under the Shein label. And, you know, I don't think you can talk about Shein without talking about their labor practices. And that is where a lot of the criticism, controversy, and scrutiny comes from, because there have been exposés, documentaries, looking into the working conditions for Shein. It is 0 time off, 75-hour work weeks, and, you know, accusations of forced labor and modern slavery.
If you want to take a day off or go back to your hometown, your wages will be deducted. This is completely unreasonable because there's no rest at all. I feel really, really tired. Exhausted.
Rotherton Bunch says most of the apparel stems from the Xinjiang province, an area where the U.S. State Department says there's a genocide happening. Members of the Muslim minority Uyghur population, often forced into prison and labor camps, produce the very goods that enter the U.S. through the apps.
Shein says that it has implements in place, internal teams that ensure that none of the suppliers that they're working with are practicing forced labor or sourcing cotton from regions that have been accused of practicing forced labor. It's difficult to confirm because lots of what's wrong with Shein, I guess you could say, is that it is so incredibly non-transparent, and it's hard to know exactly what is all laddering up to what we then ultimately see on the website. What we do know, though, is that, you know, in the U.S. and some other countries around the world, they've started calling for investigations into their labor practices and wanting to really cut down on Shein's presence in the country.
Tell me about some of the criticisms about sustainability and what it means to have very, very, very fast, very, very, very cheap fashion.
There is no way that you can make these clothes at this volume in a way that's sustainable. I think a lot of companies, and this is across fashion, it's not just Shein, they look at regenerative or organic cotton. They look at alternative materials that put, you know, less plastic out into the wash whenever you wash them. Shein could overhaul its entire material source, but at the end of the day, if they are still producing at the volume that they're producing at, it's never going to be sustainable. It outpaces the amount of production that could ever be healthy for the planet and within planetary boundaries. They've, you know, been hit with lawsuits around the toxic lead that is found in their products and the amount of carbon emissions that their facilities produce. And then you bring in the human rights issues in the supply chain from top to bottom. It's not a sustainable company. Fashion is not a sustainable industry as a whole, but Shein is basically as far as you can get.
When you look at survey and polling data, you find that Generation Z cares more about sustainability than older generations. They're really concerned with climate change. How does Shein hold on to them if it's doing things that are like documented as really bad for the planet?
I think what it comes down to is no matter who you are, the allure of cheap, trendy clothing is pretty hard to resist when you don't have the means to spend on more expensive fashion. And I think over time, clothing itself has become separated from quality. That's just not what people buy clothing for. They're not thinking about what can last. They're thinking about what they'll look the best wearing and what event they're going to and what they need a new outfit for. And I think where we have seen a new type of customer behavior, you know, pattern come up with Gen Z, they are very into resale, they're very into secondhand shopping, and thrifting has gone online. And so I think people will justify new purchases by saying, oh, I can just resell it. And then that even comes down to the Shein purchase, even though ultimately these are pieces of clothing that are disposable. So it's very contradictory, and I think, you know, it's like the hive mind versus the individual urge that's at play.
All right, this company's been around since 2008, but all of a sudden I'm reading about it everywhere. In Forbes, in Bloomberg, in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, and in Vogue. Why have we hit like peak Shein here? Why is everyone talking about it right now?
Where it blew up into public consciousness was on TikTok.
I spent $500 on Shine.
If you look at Shein's rise in the US, it's pretty in step with TikTok's. It's over the past, 3 years or so. And the Shein
purchase behavior is like perfect for the TikTok haul.
I kinda wanna do a try on haul.
And so you have creators, influencers on TikTok who will buy, you know, if you buy hundreds of dollars in Shein clothing, that's a massive haul, and then they're trying it on. The hashtag Shein haul is trending everywhere.
I heard Shein's getting banned or something, or sued or something, so I had to get my last big order in, and let's do a haul.
And I got this pink case and this pink shirt. I love it.
Now we have this houndstooth set. Obsessed with it, love it. So I have a few more things coming, because I just kept ordering and I couldn't stop. So there's definitely gonna be part 2.
It's kind of normalized that behavior, even though it's overconsumption kind of flying in the face of the sustainable ethos or thoughts that Gen Z is said to be having. At the same time, you have the pushback, and so that gains momentum as well, because, you know, a lot of people don't agree with Shein's behaviors, and at the same time, that's gone up to lawsuits and potential congressional action against Shein as well, and which I think also goes back to the TikTok question, because we're seeing some more scrutiny around Chinese-based companies over data and privacy, and so they've already kind of brought TikTok in front of Congress for that, and so the question is Shein next?
And it wants to go public.
That's right. So there are rumors that Shein is considering an IPO, which is an initial public offering, which means that it would, you know, be a publicly listed company on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or Wall Street, and Shein has not confirmed or commented on whether or not they actually are considering an IPO, but we do know that they have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in lobbying efforts in the U.S. So far this year. There's definitely a precedent for Chinese companies doing very well in the U.S., but we'll see, I guess, if the mood changes around it, and if they decide, like, oh, okay, this would really open us up to scrutiny.
Hillary Milnes of Vogue. Coming up, is Shein really stealing from designers? And if so, how is it doing it? A designer is going to walk us through it.
This is advertiser content from Eli Lilly and Company. Dr. Brandy Matthews is a neurologist and Alzheimer's disease expert at Lilly who thinks the first step to tackling Alzheimer's is knowing what it is and what it isn't.
Alzheimer's disease, at the early stages, the signs and symptoms may be ignored. I think in part due to the association of the disease with advancing age and a lack of understanding that there's an ongoing disease process, not part of normal aging.
So, what might be the difference between forgetting an appointment and forgetting the name of your hometown? Amyloid plaque.
An amyloid plaque's a clump of misfolded protein that abnormally accumulates inside of the brain and then triggers a cascade of other events. This eventually leads to disrupted communication between the brain cells. Tests are available to check for the abnormally folded sticky proteins in the brain that are associated with Alzheimer's disease using brain PET scans, cerebrospinal fluid tests, and even more recently with some specialized blood tests. Diagnosis that's timely in a patient's disease course may also have an impact on the progression of the disease if the intervention happens early.
Empower yourself with knowledge. If you're noticing memory and thinking issues, go to morethannormalaging.com to learn more about what you can do.
Support for today's show comes from Cook Unity. If you love to eat out, you know there are some expenses associated with that. You might want to check out Cook Unity, which says they're the first, quote, chef-to-you service, delivering locally sourced meals from award-winning chefs right to your door every week. Plus, says Cook Unity, it's cheaper than most other delivery options. Cook Unity provides hundreds of dishes, 7 different dietary preferences, the vegans, the paleo, the pescatarian, the gluten-free, and more. Menus are posted 2 weeks in advance. Sarah Frank, our colleague from the business side of things at Vox, tried out Cook Unity.
I recently had the chance to try Cook Unity, and I was really impressed. What's really different here than lots of other meal plans is this food comes fresh, not frozen.
Chef quality meals every week delivered right to your door. You can go to cookunity.com/explained or enter code EXPLAINED before checkout for 50% off your first week. That's 50% off your first week using code EXPLAINED or by going to cookunity.com/explained.
Hey there, beautiful people. I'm journalist and author Tre'vell Anderson, and I'm hosting the official Rustin podcast. We're diving into the man, the moment, and the movement at the center of the Netflix film.
Well, the stakes were so severe. People were getting killed for registering people to vote.
He was a pioneer in the sense that he really was radical. You are absolutely going to want to listen. I promise you that. Subscribe now wherever you get Slayworthy podcasts.
I'm Joanna Cosentino. I am a crochet designer where I sell my crochet plushies, accessories, and I also design clothing and then I sell the pattern. I think my designs get popular because nowadays, like, the trend I would say is color and expressing yourself through color. My patterns kind of they're simple, but like they are colorful and like sometimes have a fun graphic on it, and I think people like that. It was, I believe, the summer of 2021. A follower had messaged me on Instagram and they said that they were online and they saw my strawberry vest. It's like a circular kind of shape. It has mint green on it with pink trim at the bottom and like pink trim around the shoulders, and then in the middle is like a really plump red strawberry with some green leaves. And they sent me a screenshot of this strawberry vest that Shein was selling. It was mint green, pink trim, strawberry in the center, the exact same color scheme and design as mine, except it was made with like a fake knit stitch, so it was clearly mass produced with a much cheaper material. I sell the PDF pattern to make it yourself on Etsy for about $10, but if I were to make the strawberry vest by hand and sell it, I usually sell it for anywhere between $90 to $100, just based on the materials, the labor. They were selling the finished piece for $12, and obviously this wasn't actually crocheted by hand, it was a machine mock knit stitch. The fact that they were selling it for $12, which is only $2 shy of just the pattern for it, says a lot about how exploited the labor is.
That was designer Joanna Cosentino. Hillary Milnes is our co-pilot this half hour. She's an editor at Vogue Business. So, Hillary, Joanna says Shein stole a vest pattern from her. This is how I learned we're doing vests again. And they sold it for cheaper than she could. When this happens, is there ever accountability for the big company?
It's definitely not new for designers to accuse fast fashion companies of ripping off their designs, and historically the most that really happens is that the fast fashion company gets some bad press. It's very hard to kind of get any sort of copyrights around fashion IP, and this has been just a long-standing factor in the fashion industry when it comes to who owns what design.
This had been happening to like so many crocheters that I follow, like mutual designers in the community, that I wasn't surprised when they sent me this message. And then I posted on Instagram a side-by-side of the screenshot of Shein's design and my design with me wearing it next to it, and I just announced it to my followers that, hey, this happened to me. Shein is like this really shady company, like if you can, just do not support them. And the picture kind of blew up.
That said, there are some interesting nuances about the Shein lawsuit that stand out and make it feel a bit different. The most recent lawsuit, I think on the designer side, was a few coming together, and they accused Shein of being in violation of the RICO Act, which was set up, I think, in the 1970s to fight organized crime and racketeering. So this lawsuit is different in that it's not saying, look at my design, Shein ripped it off, this was a standalone offense. but it's saying that design theft is a core part of Shein's business model, basically implying that if Shein did not rip off design from other designers en masse, then Shein would have no business.
Oh, because there's no Coco Chanel. There's the design house, but there's no designer, so the brains are coming from elsewhere, more or less. In this day and age, I think you could look at this and say, this company uses technology to identify trends, and then it makes them. How does that become illegal? Seems smart.
It's not illegal on its own. We look at how many companies and design houses themselves are starting to use AI and technology to help inform the design process. So the narrative is typically, how is fashion combining art and science, and how do you get the right balance? And a lot of fashion is creating the trends, not just following them, not just repeating them. So you need to have some element of I know what my customer will want before they even want it. If you bring in too much data, then you're just going to kind of be in the same repetitive process. So Shein is not using its own customer data to inform its design trends, and then bringing in exactly what you said, that designer element on top that creates something new out of what they are predicting their customer will want. It is sourcing customer data from all over the internet in order to pick up on what trends the customer will want to buy en masse as close as possible to as soon as they're wanting it. So it's reactive. It's not leading any sort of design trend. You mentioned, is it illegal? I think that's what we're going to find out whenever we see how these lawsuits go. But one thing that the recent lawsuit from the designers mentioned was that Shein was worse than TikTok in terms of how it protected or did not protect customer data and privacy, which again is notable considering TikTok was questioned by Congress in terms of how they used customer data in the US.
Okay, so this company is facing just about every kind of criticism a company can face, up and down the ladder. Has it tried to fix its reputation? Has it done any sort of public outreach?
Yeah, so I think the most notable example of Shein trying to change the narrative around its business and its practices was the June influencer trip.
Oh, yeah.
Essentially, Shein flew some influencers out to a couple of their manufacturing plants. Showed them around and really fed them topics to talk about.
Getting to see the whole process of Shein clothing from beginning to end with my own two eyes was so important.
So they were showing basically how technology is such a core part of Shein. And they were very complimentary in terms of like how advanced Shein was. And met some of the workers and talked about how well treated they were.
Everybody was just working like normal, like chill, sitting down. They weren't even sweating.
Now I can go home feeling reassured, feeling confident in my partnership with Shein. It looked very clean. It did not match any sort of notion of what we think a sweatshop would look like.
Shein sent influencers to its factory to show them, I guess, that they don't abuse their workers. The influencers took their PR spin for gospel and reported back to their millions of combined followers.
The takeaway was to be, this is just a very technology advanced company. They are treating their workers well, and they are, working in environments that are very safe and friendly and able to be toured in a very modern looking office environment.
Okay, so all of this, and on top of that, the OG influencers, American congresspeople, are mad at Shein too.
You have select committees in Congress who are calling on Shein to change its practices and wanting to dig into these forced labor allegations, as well as looking into Shein's shipping practices into the U.S. And so the way that Shein is able to get so much volume into the US, they've actually found a shipping loophole. So it's called de minimis shipping, and it basically says that any company that if you're shipping goods under $800 worth of value into the US, they will not be taxed import taxes, and they will also not be scrutinized as much as any other retailer might be. So it's not going through customs basically in the same way. So this has really been a key mechanism for Shein when it comes to growing its business in the US. And I think Congress is now kind of picking up on the fact that Shein, as well as Temu, both building their businesses off of this practice.
Bulk sales from China over $800 are subject to American tariffs. But because each Shein and Temu sale is processed individually and cheap, both companies are able to sell hundreds of millions of dollars worth of clothes in the U.S. tariff-free.
I'm an old millennial, so I heard about Shein.
What they're doing. And we mentioned Germany for these Christmas markets. Are there other places that have terrific Christmas markets? If somebody's all about Christmas markets, where do you recommend?
Well, European tourism is the number one source of revenue for one of these some of these foreign countries. It's a huge player, and everybody's trying to figure out clever ways to stretch their season. So there's all sorts of, frankly, commercial gimmicks to get you to go in the winter. And these relate to holiday time, so they put on lots of, artisan markets and so on. And they're not unique to Germany. They seem to kind of be Germanic, but you can find them in other countries as well. But the best, the most classic, the ones that feel just like a fairy tale, are in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, I would say. And the most famous is in Nuremberg, and it's amazing. Nuremberg is just a beautiful Christmas market. I love the Christmas market in Salzburg. But you'll find Christmas markets all over Europe. Do remember when we're thinking about holiday travel that in the United States, Christmas is a couple of days out of the year. In Europe, it's a 6-week series of holy days and special times, holy day, holiday, and it starts the end of November or early December, and there's Santa Lucia Day, St. Nicholas Day. Advent, there's all sorts of things, and then there's even holy days after Christmas all the way up to January 6th, which I believe is Epiphany, and that's the day that the wise men brought the presents to baby Jesus, and that's a big day. So and for a lot of societies, New Year's Eve is a big day also. So you've got a lot going on during that period, from the beginning of December until the first week in January, and you should just do your studying ahead of time. If you go to Italy in that first week of the new year, it's all about presepi. Presepi are manger scenes, and I notice even here in Cincinnati you've got live manger scenes and so on, and every parish really puts a lot of energy into the fancy manger scene that's in their church, and it's a beautiful time. It's like open house from church to church, and you wander around, you go to the churches, and you ooh and ah about these beautiful manger scenes. The biggest one is right on the main square in the Vatican, Piazza San Pedro, and they've got a literal house that is the manger, and a towering Christmas tree, and it's sort of the capper of all of this wonderful time when the community's out, bundled up, enjoying the squares, and it's a delightful time to be there.
Wow. What if people aren't into Christmas markets, but they're interested in kind of Christmas traditions and where some of these traditions started, some of the history of Christmas in Europe. What are places they can go that aren't just all about shopping?
Well, the first place they should go is to my website, ricksteves.com, and go into the TV section. Every TV show I've ever made is there for free. It's just a click away. 150 TV shows that we've enjoyed on public broadcasting over the last 30 years. And go to the special section, and there's a 1-hour special that I made about European Christmas. And it takes you to 7 different countries, and we get into the sacred and traditional and non-commercial and beautiful dimensions of Christmas. And it's just a delightful hour. And again, you can just watch it. It's free, no ads, just bam, you've got it. And then you can see the wonderful, fascinating origins of all these Christmas traditions, and how so many of them even predate Christianity. I mean, these were pagan festivals. It's the midwinter festival. Call it what you like, but here's a new religion. You're going to be a Christian now, and we're going to take the festival of Saturn, and we're going to turn it into the day Jesus was born, and you're all going to be thankful that this is a long, dark winter, but there's going to be life coming on again. These kind of origins. When you think, I really like in my travels not to be ethnocentric, not to measure everything back to the United States, not to think the world's a pyramid with us on top and everybody else trying to figure it out, because that's not right. And it is a bad, ethnocentric, ugly American sort of attitude when you're on the road. But I also, while I don't want to be ethnocentric, I don't want to be chronocentric. Chronocentric is looking at things through a 2023 lens. It's a real thing these days. Politically correct people want to judge everything by our 2023 sensibilities. I'm all for how we're striving to be equitable and fair and all this kind of great stuff. But I don't like to judge past times on how evolved we are that way. So it just makes no sense to me. I like to try to understand my sightseeing and the cultural learning I'm doing through a local context and try to understand what it was like back then. What was the mindset 500 years ago before they had public radio, before they had moving images, before they had science, back when the Roman Catholic Church controlled the sacred texts, and they're only available in Latin, and they had to be translated to you and interpreted and spoon-fed to you by some priest. What were the opportunities for corruption and taking advantage of people who were uneducated way back then? And try to understand it, and then what was the big deal when they finally translated the Bible into a language people could read, and somebody questioned whether you have to go to Rome to get to heaven. And there was a big war, and that was 500 years ago. Well, if you're looking at a church from pre-Reformation times, try to see it through pre-Reformation eyes. It's just a philosophy to your sightseeing. If you're looking at a handwritten manuscript, imagine how precious that was when information was power. There was no Google, there was no printing. Most people couldn't read, and you've got these handwritten texts. And then imagine what happened when Gutenberg made it possible to print this stuff up cheaply. And, all of a sudden people were literate, and all of a sudden things were kind of going viral.
On 91.7 WVXU, with host Marianne Zalesnik. Support comes from Joseph Clark Gallery, located in Northside, where African culture celebrates African art. You can immerse yourself in the energy of tribal masks, traditional wooden and bronze figures, tribal currencies, textiles, and jewelry, along with original paintings and artwork from local artists. Learn more at josephclarkgallery.com. Support for Cincinnati Edition comes from the Johnson Foundation, a private grant-making foundation committed to creating a more vibrant urban core through community development and civic engagement. More information at johnson-foundation.org.
This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Lucy May. We're continuing our recorded conversation with travel host Rick Steves, who's here to share his holiday travel tips. Rick, we've talked a lot about holiday travel. There's certainly people who are thinking about winter travel aside from the holidays. They maybe got holiday plans at home and they want to go abroad afterwards. If people are just getting started, how important is planning for a trip? How far ahead do you need to plan? What are the things you make sure to lock down first?
That's interesting you asked me that question, because I'm just giving talks tonight and last night in Dayton and Cincinnati for public television, and I'm talking about the importance of packing or planning.
packing light, yes, but the importance of planning. And I just think, for one thing, it extends the joy of your trip, because you're getting into that frame of mind ahead of time. And the more context and understanding and skills you bring to your travels, the more you'll enjoy. Well, I like to think that we want people to enjoy maximum travel thrills for every mile, minute, and dollar on their vacation. And we Americans have the shortest vacations in the rich world, so we need to use our time smartly. We're always trying to see too much. And make a smart itinerary. And one of the results of the whole pandemic era is that great sites had to control the crowds by monitoring how many people they would let in. So you had to get a timed entry, and every 15 minutes they'd let in another 50 people or whatever. And now they don't need to do that anymore, but they want to do it because they like to not have that chaos outside their door. So you no longer have a 200-yard long line in front of Anne Frank's house, and you no longer have a commotion of crowds in front of Leonardo's Last Supper in Milano. You've got every 30 minutes 50 people showing up because they made a reservation and they've got that QR code on their phone, and they are let in. It's sort of sanity. It's quite nice from the museum's point of view. We have to remember these days, so many of us travelers have this herd mentality. We always go to the same places at the same time and marvel at how crowded it is, when the rest of Europe is not crowded with tourism. So that's a very important thing, is to remember in your planning. A new dimension of planning is knowing what you need reservations for in advance, and then going online and making them. It's a different sensibility. Another thing is, in Europe, they pay their workers so well that it's quite expensive to have good service, and they're trying to automate everything. So if you insist on giving hard cash to a human being to buy that ticket at a box office, they might have that available, but it's going to really be frustrating, and they're not going to give you much respect, because you should be doing it with your credit card online. That's what they're pushing everybody into. And for me, it's an adjustment, because I like hard cash and giving it straight to somebody. But I'm getting good at that now. It's just, paying on advance with my credit card and getting the QR code and then just showing up at the right time. So when I'm updating my guidebooks, and every city it seems should have a sidebar on the front page that says what you got to have reserved in advance. And this is really important for sightseeing in Europe, because, as I say, everybody likes to go to the same places, and the critical places that you want to see require reservation. If you go to the box office, a lot of times it just says, we don't have a box office anymore. Very frustrated. Book in advance. I like to say there's two IQs of European travelers: those who wait in lines and those who don't wait in lines. And if you're waiting in line, you're probably screwing up.
Yeah. What about those off the beaten path places? You talk about how you discover new things every time you go. You have these eureka moments. What are some places, if people are planning and maybe they've already been, and they've been to the Louvre, they've been to these museums, they've seen the masterpieces, they've seen the beautiful cathedrals and churches, they're lucky enough to have those experiences under their belt. Right. What are some of those other places where you can visit a place that's off the beaten path, live like a local, and really experience Europe that way?
Well, that's the magic right there. You just hit it on the nail. I mean, I started my whole teaching writing a book called Europe Through the Back Door. And the idea was going through the back doors, finding these places that are not promoted, that places, magical little places that have no promotional budgets, places that don't live and die on the tourist dollar. And you said, well, what if you've seen all the famous things? Well, then the fun starts. Okay, you checked off all those things on your bucket list. Now you can travel and just be there. What I like to think is you could be a well-traveled American when it comes to Europe, but you've always seen the big famous places. What about the second-tier sites? And they're not second quality, they're just not as trendy. Every country has its, everybody goes to Edinburgh. What about Glasgow? Everybody goes to Lisbon. What about Porto? Everybody goes to Paris. What about Lyon or Marseille? These are great cities. I call them second cities. And the cool thing about second cities is they're less expensive. They're more edgy. A lot of them are industrial, sort of Rust Belt places that are now leaping into the fore with energy and with creativity and wonderful little mom and pops and wonderful galleries and wonderful street art. You go to these second cities and you take a street art tour. You take a food tour. You know, you enjoy the energy of a town that is not focused on tourism. It's really quite refreshing after standing in long lines to see Big Ben and the Eiffel Tower.
Sure. And how do you figure out where to stay, especially in those kind of second cities? How do you decide hotel or bed and breakfast, or maybe rent somebody's apartment or flat? How do you make those decisions?
Well, if you're going to a place where you have a guidebook, that's what you have a guidebook for. A guidebook is a $20 tool for a $3,000 experience. And this is what I do. I've written 50 guidebooks, and I have a staff of 100 people, and we spend a lot of energy visiting sites in person and updating them. I spend 100 days a year in Europe. A third of that time is with working on my tours. A third of that time is filming TV for public television. And a third of that time is me alone with local guides updating my guidebooks. And as far as accommodations go, you got to decide what kind of accommodations do you want. Do you have miles, and do you want to stay in some international chain outside of town or at the airport because it's free with your incentives? And it's got elevators and all the modern stuff, and you can tune into your favorite TV channel. Or do you want to stay in a characteristic town in the old center, which might not have an elevator, or you might not be able to drive to, and it might not take your incentives and so on. So you got to decide that. I like a small family-run hotel in a great location. That's what I really like. Bed and breakfast used to be great, but now they're pretty much Airbnb and absentee managed. My traditional dream of a bed and breakfast is being part of a family, and the lady of the house serves you a nice breakfast, and they invite you to sit down and have tea and cookies and watch the soccer game that evening, and you're just you're staying in their house, and it's kind of a boost to their meager family budget. But now it's mostly people who have desirable location, and they realize I can move into the suburbs where no tourists want to go in, rent out my apartment, and really make a living doing that. And you have a little corner depot where that's the conciergerie for all of these B&Bs, and it's automated now, and it's just business, and it's you don't meet anybody, but it's a good value. But we got to remember there's an ethical issue when you stay in these short-term rentals. If you're booting out the local people, they have to live out in the concrete suburbs. And the irony is, what made that old traditional neighborhood charming was the people who lived there and the businesses they kept alive with their patronage. Now they're gone. Those businesses cannot survive anymore, and they're replaced by businesses that cater to the tourists. So the market on the Ramblas in Barcelona no longer caters to local people with their shopping baskets. It's catering to tourists with, slushies and exotic fruit on skewers and potpourri. It's not the Ramblas anymore. So we have to kind of make that all balanced together. But there's plenty of options for good accommodations in Europe.
Yeah. One final question for you. What if you're a person who's always felt like you could never travel abroad because of maybe the cost or the time? You mentioned the small amounts of vacation time that we have in this country. How do you get it in your sights? How do you make it happen if you really aspire to travel abroad, either by yourself or with your family, and it just seems out of reach?
Most people who don't think they can afford to go to Europe, they can afford to go to Orlando, and they can afford to go to Vegas, and they can afford to do a lot of things. All you got to do is buy a cheap plane ticket to Europe, and it's about the same cost in Europe as it is here. So, for a lot of people, that's not an excuse. You're just afraid to deal with a foreign country. And I think getting out of your comfort zone is a beautiful thing. A lot of people are afraid of culture shock. Culture shock is considered a bad thing. No, culture shock, especially for Americans, is a beautiful thing. Culture shock is the growing pains of a broadening perspective. It's constructive. And you need a guidebook or a tour guide like me to curate the culture shock, maybe. But my favorite thing is culture shock, and I want to learn more about my home and my lifestyle by leaving it and looking at it from a distance. I want to learn how other people do this, have the same struggles that we have, and I want to broaden my perspective. That's a beautiful thing. A lot of people are afraid to travel these days, and that just baffles me. I mean, when I started teaching, people said bon voyage. Nobody says bon voyage anymore. Now what do they say? Have a safe trip. We'll pray for you. Well, come on. I mean, if somebody tells me have a safe trip when I'm going to Europe, I'm inclined to say, well, you have a safe stay at home, because where I'm going statistically, and I know statistics are optional these days, but where I'm going statistically is safer than where you're staying. And I just think the greatest thing we can do is travel. And if you travel well, you come home with that most beautiful souvenir, and that is with a passion for building not walls, but bridges, so you can connect with the rest of the world. The world's a beautiful place.
Well, I've been talking with travel host Rick Steves. You can hear Travel with Rick Steves every Sunday on WVXU at 3 p.m. Thank you so much for your time today, Rick.
Oh, it's so nice to be with you, and happy travels.
Happy travels to you. Up next, we'll get some holiday baking tips from local experts. This is Cincinnati Edition.
Support comes from Water Tower Fine Wines to help you celebrate, toast, and cheer in the new year. Water Tower Fine Wines offers a selection of over 250 champagnes and over 100 sparkling wines from around the globe. To shop their selection of bubbly, visit watertowerfinewines.com.
Support comes from the Cincinnati Art Museum in Eden Park, where you can make memories while enjoying everything from modern to classic art by world-famous artists and local talent. Experience more than 73,000 works spanning 6,000 years. Open to the public 6 days a week. Explore more at cincinnatiartmuseum.org.
Hi, it's Steve Inskeep. At Morning Edition, we're honored that people from around the world trust us with their stories.
We are a family that was broken up by migration when my father left.
We need our elders. There are language holders. There are culture sharers.
We need some changes. Things must change.
Join us for Morning Edition from NPR News for stories that bring the news to life.
With host Marianne Zalesnik on 91.7 WVXU.
Support comes from the East Walnut Hills Business Association. This holiday season is your opportunity to discover historic East Walnut Hills and the wide variety of eclectic independent businesses where you can shop, eat, and play. From charming boutiques to cozy cafes, the neighborhood offers a diverse array of establishments. Explore more online at eastwalnuthills.org.
Who says you can't have your cake and eat it too? Sponsoring programming at 91.7 WVXU and 88.5 WMUB not only maximizes your marketing efforts, you also support an important source of award-winning local journalism. The public radio audience is loyal, informed, and involved, and has an inherent appreciation for our sponsors. Information at WVXU.org.
This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Lucy May. The holidays are here, and for many of us, that means it's time to start baking. And if you're like me, that means cookies. Do you have favorites you make every year? Are you looking for a new recipe to add to the mix? Today, we're going to get some tips from some local experts to help you make cookies that are both tasty and beautiful. Joining me in this recorded interview are Beyond Grain Bakery owner and baker Jessica Stern-Enzi. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks for having me.
And Brown Bear Bakery co-owner Blair Fornchell. Thanks for being here, Blair.
Of course, very excited. Thanks for having us.
I'm very excited to talk cookies. This is great. It's making me hungry just thinking about it. It's getting colder outside, and baking these sweet treats around a warm oven feels like the right thing to do. Let's start with you, Jessica. What are some of the staple cookies that you have to have at every holiday gathering? What are your go-to holiday cookies?
Well, I grew up in a Jewish family, so for our family, it was all the traditional Jewish cookies. At Hanukkah time, it was a cookie called Mandelbrot, which is also called mandel bread. It's a Yiddish cookie that's similar to an Italian biscotti. And then also ragala, which can be stuffed with all different kinds of fillings depending on what you want. So those two are always staples in our house.
Yeah, what were your favorite fillings?
I preferred the chocolate chips. My mom usually did some sort of jam and nut filling, which is also delicious, but I'm just a chocolate person. So.
I hear you. I hear you. That sounds right for me. Yeah. What about you, Blair? What are your go-to holiday cookies?
Goodness. Having the bakery
down in OTR for now 7 holiday seasons, I've really fallen into more traditions in my adult life than growing up. So things that I like to do are decorated sugar cookies, shortbreads of all variety. My favorite is probably a rosemary shortbread with a dark cocoa frosting. I really love brownies and salted chocolate chip cookies. There's really not a cookie that doesn't have a place at my table, to be honest.
That's fair. That also sounds familiar. Are there some cookies that you only make during the holidays? Some that just feel like I have to have these for the holidays? And what about you? You're nodding yes, Blair, so I feel like that's an affirmative.
For sure. Molasses cookies, gingerbread, anything with a lot of ginger, I feel like really has a place, and people really like to come in for those items, especially around the holidays.
Yeah. Have you been building new traditions, Jessica? Are there now cookies and things that you make around the holidays that maybe you didn't make so much growing up?
Yeah. For the bakery, I do a lot of the more traditional kinds of holiday cookies that Blair mentioned. Lots of warming spices, cinnamon, ginger, cardamom, those kinds of flavors. Also lots of snickerdoodles, just anything that's kind of got that cozy, warm spice.
Yeah. What do you think makes the right or the best kind of gingerbread or molasses cookie? I mean, what are the flavors, or do you have a secret for making yours the most tasty?
A secret. I don't know about a secret. It just depends on what kind of cookie you prefer, I think. Some people like the crisper, thinner cookies, and some people like the thicker, cakier kind of cookies. I'm more of that variety. I like the thicker, cakier cookies. So, but I think that, any winter kind of cookie, if it has, again, those warming spices in it, and lots of ginger and cinnamon and cloves and the molasses, the house just smells unbelievable, and a warm cookie out of the oven, you can't go wrong.
That's the